This is the 2023 Razer Blade 14, and it's been refreshed with AMD's Ryzen 9 7940 series CPU and NVIDIA's RTX 40 series graphics. It's their least expensive and smallest gaming laptop, joining the Blade 16 and Blade 18 models. It's been a while since we've looked at an AMD laptop, that too from Razer. And they've addressed most of our concerns with the newer model. Now, there has been some talk about the claimed 140 watt TGP for the GPU, so we'll talk about that in detail later in the video. Plus, as I was doing my regular spring cleanup, I found last year's Blade 14. So this one has a Ryzen 9 6900HS and a 3070 Ti, so it'll be interesting to see the performance improvements with the new Blade 14, if there are any. And finally, wrap things up by discussing its value proposition. So let's dive right in. Now, Razer is only offering 2 SKUs with this year's Blade 14. The base spec comes with a Ryzen 9 7940HS processor, 16 gigs of DDR5 memory, 1TB SSD, and an RTX 4060 for $2,400 US. The next tier comes with an RTX 4070, which adds another $300 to the price. And if you need more memory, you can opt for 32 gigabytes, but that's an extra $100. And keep in mind that it only comes with the Mercury White Edition. $2,700 for a 14-inch gaming laptop with a 4070 is a lot of money, even if we factor in inflation. But I'm not sure if I can either point fingers at either Razer or NVIDIA for the RTX stacks. Now, the design hasn't changed all that much with this generation. It's the same boxy-shaped CNC milled aluminum chassis that's built really well. Unfortunately, this matte black finish is a huge fingerprint magnet, so it does require some extra care. Honestly, for a 14-inch gaming laptop, this is probably one of the best built devices compared to something like the ROG Zephyrus G14. The overall dimensions have shifted slightly compared to last year's model, so the depth is a little bigger in order to accommodate the 16:10 display, but they did shorten the length to make up for that expansion. The Z height has increased by 0.04 inches, which isn't a whole lot. Honestly, you won't be able to tell the difference between these laptops. It's still thinner than the G14 and MSI Stealth 14 Studio if you want to bring that into comparison. So props to Razer for keeping this low profile form factor. The power adapter is the same old 230 watt brick that comes with my worst nightmare, and that's these braided cables with the 90-degree connector. I mean, I don't mind the thickness because you need to feed enough power to the components inside, but Razer, I mean, just give us something different and easier to work with. The I/O setup hasn't changed, so on the left-hand side, you get power in, USB Type-A 3.2 Gen 2, audio jack, and a USB 4 Type-C port. Now, this is a really cool and needed feature for AMD laptops since you can now plug in Thunderbolt devices like docks and eGPUs. It also supports power delivery for up to 100 watts, and they also function as display ports as well. Switching to the right, there is Kensington, HDMI 2.1, another USB Type-A, and a USB 4 Type-C port. Unfortunately, you don't get a full-size SD card reader like what you find on the Blade 16 and Blade 18 laptops. And now, let's hear from this video sponsor.
Leave uncertainty behind for something that is guaranteed to last. The new P20 series grants unlimited upgrades with roomy insides, dual 360s, metal front mesh for good airflow, and 4 models to choose from. Check out Antec down below.
Okay, so taking a look at the interior space, once again, nothing really has changed except for the massive trackpad. It is refreshing to get more surface area to work around with, and it's really smooth. The switches are okay. They're not the best that I've tested on a gaming laptop. I mean, a good example would be something like the Yoga Pro 9i from Lenovo that has the same Z height as the Blade 14, and the keyboard is absolutely amazing with plenty of key travel from 1.3 to 1.5 millimeters, and they support a concave dish for better comfort. It's just a great experience typing on that laptop. The one on the Blade 14 feels like a copy and paste from older generations. But other than that, chroma lighting looks fabulous, and you can customize lighting effects through Synapse if it works. You see, I have a really bad history with Synapse. I went through my fair share of torture with the Razer Nomo V2 Pro speakers, and I guess the same thing applies here with the Blade 14, the Blade 16, and the Blade 18. Oftentimes, Synapse just becomes unresponsive. It doesn't reflect what the RGB lighting is on the laptop, and it sometimes just doesn't detect the laptop. So I'd have to reboot the system for it to recognize that. So yeah, I mean, Razer, if you're watching this, just please fix Razer Synapse. So with that rant out of the way, this is what the webcam quality looks like on the new Razer Blade 14. Now they have stepped up in terms of quality from the previous generation Blade 14s, from 720p to 1080p. So there's more detailed, slightly better field of view, and the microphone sounds really good. So I can comfortably take this for casual streaming and, just taking regular meetings and stuff online. I also love the privacy shutter switch right above the sensor. This is a great feature for those who value privacy, and there is an LED indicator right beside that, which is a nice visual aid, and this laptop supports Windows Hello. Now, the speakers are front-facing, and while they do have better sound projection, it lacks bass compared to the Blade 16 and 18 because there are no bottom-facing woofers. For context, my MacBook Air sounds miles better than the Blade 14. Now, I know it's not a fair comparison, but I just don't know how Apple managed to cram good sounding speakers inside a laptop that's just so thin. The display on the Blade 14 has received a massive upgrade. They finally made the shift to a 16:10 aspect ratio screen, which results in more vertical screen real estate. You're also getting Quad HD Plus at 240Hz compared to 165Hz on last generation. So this is a buttery smooth panel for gaming. Now keep in mind that this is something that the G14 doesn't offer, since those laptops cap at 165Hz. This IPS grade panel is also a great incentive for creators, as it covers 100% sRGB, 87% Adobe RGB, and 98% P3. On top of that, it's also a really bright display. Our sample was able to sustain around 570 nits, so whether you're indoors or outdoors, it's got you covered. Seriously, I'm impressed with this panel, guys. For a 14-inch laptop, it's hard to beat. Okay, so upgradability hasn't been the Blade 14's forte, since the memory was soldered onto the PCB due to chassis restrictions, but that changes today because the slight increase in thickness finally gives users the option for 2 SODIMM slots that can be upgraded to up to 64 gigabytes, which is awesome. You also get one M.2 Gen 4 SSD, and the drive speeds are pretty fast. It's similar to what I got with the previous model. So with that out of the way, let's talk about battery life, because for a 14-inch laptop, it's one of the key factors that you would be looking for. And unfortunately, with Intel-based 13th gen laptops, those weren't that great. But supposedly with AMD Ryzen 7000, it's supposed to be better. And is it on the Blade 14? Well, the answer is absolutely, because AMD just nailed efficiency. Now I get it, this is the only 14-inch laptop here in the charts, but you have to take into account that Intel-based laptops like the Blade 16, M16, and even the ultra-portable Slim Pro 9i all have a larger capacity, sometimes by a big amount. And in a world where Windows 11 is sucking the life out of batteries faster than you can blink, getting over 10 hours is a pretty big achievement, guys. And while it's slightly better than the Blade 14 from 2022, some of that can be due to the 10% larger battery on the latest generation. But either way, if you're looking for 14-inch portability alongside some pretty serious performance chops, this is one of the few options out there. Now, speaking of performance, we need to talk about how the Blade 14 manages its power, or basically Razer's marketing versus reality, because there's been a lot of controversy about it. And with good reason too, because according to them, the Blade 14's RTX 4070 can run up to 140 watts, and that's not entirely true. Let me explain. First of all, in order to get that number, the RTX 4070 typically runs at an absolute peak of 115 watts, which is actually the maximum NVIDIA allows in their own specs. So that's pretty straightforward, right? Well, not really, because on top of that, there's technically another 25 watts of headroom granted by NVIDIA's dynamic boost algorithm. Now, what that does is, if the situation is just right with very low CPU usage and very high GPU needs, the RTX 4000 series will detect the extra TDP overhead and run at higher than default wattage. But since it's tied to NVIDIA's boost algorithm, it'll only do it if temperatures and voltage also allow it. So actually getting that 140 watts in Razer specs involves a super delicate balancing act and an absolutely perfect set of conditions, which is why they're careful to mention the up to line. See, you'll probably never see it during normal gaming scenarios, and I think Asus says it perfectly on their website. Their dynamic boost spec clearly says that they needed to use Furmark in order to get their dynamic boost numbers, whereas Razer just doesn't. So Razer, yes, you've got the highest wattage RTX 4070 in a laptop of the Blade 14 size. You don't need to inflate this number any more than it already is. I know the wattage battle is important on laptops, but you need to be clear about how you got this 140 watts, because we didn't see it. What we did experience is a massive delta between the highest consuming games and the lowest when running in the highest performance mode. It went from just 68 watts in CSGO at 1080p all the way up to a constant 115 watts in Doom Eternal at 1440p. What this shows is a few things. First of all, at 1080p, most of the games are CPU limited, so the RTX 4070 is never 100% utilized, and it cuts down wattage as a result. Meanwhile, there's some processor bottlenecking going on at 1440p, but the graphics card can still stretch its leg a lot more, just never even close to Razer's claimed 140 watts. One of the reasons being the CPU was never below 20% utilization. Even in such a condensed chassis, with the most power-hungry game we found, the smallest blade performs pretty well actually. Temperatures are well managed, clock speeds stay high, and it never goes under 84 watts. The only bad news is that in boost mode, the Blade 14 screams like a banshee, and you'll need to kick it down to balanced if you want to save your eardrums. Though riding up to almost 50 decibels certainly isn't quiet. But if you're wearing headphones, this shouldn't matter. When running a full 2D workload, it's actually a lot better behaved, though the 7940HS does get a bit toasty often running at 75 watts. But otherwise, you just need to take note that balance means a pretty significant performance reduction. So with that out of the way, I do want to level with you guys about one thing. It was the entire team's intent to have the Zephyrus G14 in our benchmarks, and we made every effort to make sure that happened. But it didn't, even after delaying this video. It just didn't arrive in time, so right now, it's the Blade 14's closest competitor, but on the positive side, we'll be able to compare the two in our G14 review, so stay tuned for that. What we did include here is an interesting mashup of laptops. Of course, we needed to include the Blade 14 from 2022 to see how much performance difference there is. It'll be tested in its balanced and boost modes for a real apples-to-apples comparison. Then there's the Lenovo Slim Pro 9i, which is also a super thin and portable device that rocks an RTX 4070 at 100 watts. It's a 16-inch form factor, but will retail for about the same price as the Blade 14 spec that we have over here. The Blade 16 with an RTX 4080 is here to compare what stepping up a bit in Razer's lineup does for performance. Finally, we threw in the Zephyrus M16 for fun, since its RTX 4090 chugs along just 88 watts, though it has the highest CPU power of the bunch. So let's get on to real-world benchmarks, and I'm gonna pause right here because I just need to explain the colors going on here. From this point forward, the Blade 14 2023 will be in orange for its boost mode and teal for balanced. Meanwhile, the 2022 version's two modes will be these two shades of green. And what you'll see through all these benchmarks is the 7940HS is very competitive with some of the fastest Intel laptop CPUs on the market right now when running at comparable power levels. It's a massive leap forward in performance versus the 6900HS running in last year's Blade 14. I mean, if you look closely, the 7940HS running at just 42 watts can walk all over a 6900HS running at 30 watts or more. When it comes to performance per watt, something that's critical in the laptop market, what AMD's been able to accomplish with the same 8-core 16-thread layout is simply incredible. At call resolve, the biggest win for the system since the Blade 14 with its RTX 4070 comes within just 23 seconds of the RTX 4090 Zephyrus M16, and it beats the Pro 9i by a good margin too. Adobe Premiere, on the other hand, is always tough for AMD-based laptops since the parallel rendering of quick-sync acceleration on Intel CPUs just allows them to walk all over Ryzen CPUs, even when systems are equipped with identical graphics cards. I should also mention there's a Premiere issue that prevents the AMD CPU from running properly in this test, so hopefully it gets fixed soon. Now on to gaming performance, starting with 1080p, and you'll end up seeing the same story repeated over and over again. Overall, the new Blade 14 provides decent gaming performance, but the RTX 4070 still has some consistency problems in a few titles like CSGO and 1% lows in Doom and a few other titles. This is something that we've been seeing on the desktop side too, so I guess it's expected here. I'm just frustrated they're still around this long after the RTX 4000 series launch, and I think consistency is a perfect term here because it's something the Blade 14 doesn't really have. A lot of the times, it's faster than the 2022 version, while at others, it struggles to deliver noticeably better frame rates. Now, a gaming laptop lives and dies by its GPU, and unfortunately, the RTX 4070 simply isn't all that much of an improvement over the 3070 Ti, even when we take some of the CPU bottlenecking out of the equation at 1440p. It needed more power just to get a narrow win, so the Blade 14 is only slightly faster than its year-old predecessor. Now sure, in some games there's a good jump forward, and yes, obviously at times the AMD CPU still does struggle, but this is obviously a bit worrying for people who want to put down $2,700 on a gaming laptop. I mean, no wonder Nvidia is pimping DLSS 3, because without it, the 4070 is a pretty pathetic addition to a gaming laptop that's ultimately more expensive than last year's version. It's like they're saying, hey, if you really want an upgrade, go get the 4080. So it all comes down to a question of consistency for the new Blade 14. You see, on one hand, you get one of the best designed ultra-portable gaming laptops around with a stunning display, upgradable memory, a really good Ryzen CPU, and yes, something amazing in 2023, great battery life. The negatives though, there's just the big one. Even with running at full wattage, the RTX 4070 just isn't much of an upgrade over last year's Blade 14. You still get impressive frame rates for a thin and light 14-inch laptop, but I'm sure everyone, even me, was expecting more. On that note, I hope you're able to take away everything that you needed to know about the Razer Blade 14. Stay tuned for our G14 review. I think that would sort of paint the whole picture in terms of which one stands out in the 14-inch gaming laptop market. And if there are any other 14-inch laptops that you guys want to just check out, let us know in the comments down below. I'm Ibor with Hurricanex. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Oh, and spend responsibly.